Alright, this is Block 2, Section 3, the Spanish-American War, and we will start with yellow journalism. Yellow journalism. The United States in the early 20th century and the late 19th century was a literate society. Almost everybody could read and write. And the way people got their news was through newspaper circulation. The late 19th century was the heyday of mass newspaper circulation. New York City alone had 11 daily newspapers, each of them appealing to a different demographic. There was newspapers for, the wealthy. There was newspapers for the middle class. There was newspapers for radical communists. There was a newspaper for Democrats. There was a newspaper for Republicans. There was newspapers that focused on gossip, and there was newspapers that focused on real international news. But people just ate them up, and most everyone read at least one newspaper a day, and would buy them for a penny or a nickel on the street. Well, because there were so many newspapers, the competition between them was fierce, and two papers especially engaged in this neck and neck competition to sell as many newspapers as they could, and they were the New York World, published by Joseph Pulitzer, and the New York Herald, published by William Randolph Hearst. And they used, how shall we say this, not illegal, because they certainly were not illegal, but they did not cleave to the highest journalistic standards that you can imagine. And the New York World and the New York Herald had very little regard for truth, had very little regard for honest journalistic ethics. And the point was not to tell the truth, the point was to sell newspapers. And they used lots of different methods to sell those newspapers. The huge eye-catching headlines, exaggerated news events, scandal mongering. A rumor about a politician would all of a sudden become front-page news the next morning. Pure sensationalism, bold layouts, large illustrations. This was before there was obviously photography, but still in the newspapers, most illustrations were done by hand. And in one famous scene, Hearst dispatched an illustrator to Cuba to comment on the atrocities that the Spanish were committing against the Cuban population. And the newspaper illustrator said to Hearst, he said, well, I'm not even sure if this is really going on and how. And Hearst stopped him and said, look, you give me the pictures and I'll give you the war. Hearst was looking for war between the United States and Spain, and he was going to use this person's ability to draw pictures to further the goals that he wanted. And this is what happened in these newspapers all the time. Scary headlines, lots of pictures, imaginary drawing, faked interviews. An interview with an expert on such and such, without naming names, would be put in the newspaper. Freedom of the press involves the freedom to stretch the truth, like this. And the public ate it up. And because it was a matter of competition, the more sensational and exaggerated Hearst's paper got, Pulitzer's paper had to one-up him the next day, so he would not be shut out of selling newspapers. This yellow journalism is going to play an important role in the coming of the Spanish-American War, especially along the East Coast in New York City, and in these places where these newspapers had an effect. And we're going to see how this played a role as we go through some more of these terms. But yellow journalism is a very important concept. It's sort of the downside to a freedom of the press.